Fear the Walking Dead had one job. One single job that justified its entire existence. Show us the fall of civilization that The Walking Dead skipped. Show us the hospitals shutting down, the military checkpoints collapsing, the moment your neighbor stops being your neighbor. Instead, the show did something so baffling it still makes fans angry years later. It skipped it too. And the reason why is even worse than you think. The skipped transition. Season 3 of Fear the Walking Dead is genuinely great television. It ends with a dam exploding, the Clark family scattered, and the entire world of the show cracking open in a way that promised something incredible. That finale aired on October 15th, 2017. Season 4 premiered on April 15th, 2018. And when it came back, everything had changed. Not in an exciting way, in a we literally skipped the most important part of the story way. Between those two seasons, the show jumped forward in time. Weeks, possibly months of survival happened entirely off camera. Characters whose fates were left hanging after the dam explosion just showed up in new locations with zero explanation. The transitional period between society is crumbling and full apocalypse was gone. Poof. The one thing this show existed to depict, and they cut it like a deleted scene on a DVD nobody bought. Here's where it gets worse. The reason for the skip wasn't creative. It was corporate. The show needed to sync its timeline with The Walking Dead so they could bring Morgan Jones over as a crossover character. That's it. The entire unique identity of Fear the Walking Dead was sacrificed so a guy from the parent show could walk from Virginia to Texas. But the real tragedy is what we lost. Original showrunner Dave Erickson had a documented 7-season plan for the series. Madison Clark, the show's protagonist, was supposed to slowly become a Negan-like villain over the course of the full run. A mother who starts out protecting her family and gradually becomes the monster. That's a genuinely compelling arc. That's the kind of slow-burn character tragedy that wins awards and builds legacy audiences. Instead, Erickson left the show after season 3, and his entire vision left with him. The 7-season plan, the villain Madison arc, the detailed exploration of society's collapse, all of it gone. A show literally called Fear the Walking Dead chose to skip the part where people first had reason to be afraid, which is, not ideal. But if you think skipping the best part of the story was bad, wait until you see what they replaced it with. The season 4 soft reboot. Here's where the show didn't just stumble. It performed a full identity transplant and hoped nobody would notice. When season 4 premiered in April 2018, Fear the Walking Dead was, on paper, the same show, same title, same network, same Sunday night slot. But behind the scenes, literally, everything had changed. Scott M. Gimple, the executive producer who'd been steering The Walking Dead during its own controversial decline, was now overseeing Fear. Original showrunner Dave Erickson was gone. In his place, Ian Goldberg and Andrew Chambliss arrived with a mandate to rebuild from the ground up. New creative direction, new cast members, new visual style, new storytelling structure, even a brand new opening credits sequence, which honestly told you everything you needed to know. This wasn't a creative evolution. This was a ground-up reconstruction wearing the same title like a skinsuit. And the first thing the new regime had to deal with was a problem they didn't even create. Frank Delane, the actor behind Nick Clark, had already requested his exit before Goldberg and Chambliss even showed up for work. So one of the most central characters in the entire series, the guy who'd been there since the pilot, got killed off in episode 3 by a child with a gun, 3 episodes into the new era, and the show had already lost a foundational pillar. Great start. But here's the kicker. 5 episodes later, in the mid-season finale, they killed Madison Clark too, the emotional anchor, the character the entire first 3 seasons had been built around, gone. Within 8 episodes of the new showrunners taking over, 2/3 of the Clark family had been erased from the board. Now, did the audience notice? Season 4 opened to roughly 3 million viewers for its first 5 episodes. People were curious about Morgan's crossover, the new direction, all of it. By the end of season 4, that number had dropped by about 50%. By the end of season 5, it dropped another 50%. That's a cumulative loss of approximately 75% of the audience in 2 seasons. 3 out of every 4 viewers looked at what the show had become and simply walked away. The reboot didn't just change Fear the Walking Dead. It systematically dismantled every element that made it its own thing and replaced it with a watered-down version of the parent show. The numbers don't lie. The gamble failed catastrophically, but the raw viewership collapse only tells half the story. Because what those numbers really reflect is the destruction of something specific. Something the show spent 3 seasons carefully building. The Clark family dynamic. Here's the thing about Fear the Walking Dead that people forget. The show wasn't a zombie survival series. It was a family drama that happened to have zombies in it. That was the entire pitch. A guidance counselor and an English teacher trying to hold their kids together while the world falls apart. Madison, Travis, Nick, Alicia, that was the show. The Clarks. And for 3 seasons, it worked. Madison was the ruthless pragmatist who'd do anything to protect her family. Travis was the moral compass trying to hold on to his humanity. Nick was the addict who was weirdly weirdly more comfortable in the apocalypse than he ever was in normal life, and Alicia was the one who kept getting overlooked, despite being the most competent person in the room. Their dysfunction, their loyalty, their constant tension between doing what's right and doing what keeps your family alive, that was the engine driving everything forward. Then season 4 happened, and somebody decided the engine needed to be ripped out and thrown into a ditch. Travis was already gone. He took a bullet in the season 3 premiere and died in a helicopter, which was devastating, but at least felt earned. His slow descent from pacifist teacher to someone capable of beating 2 men to death with his bare hands was genuinely compelling television. Losing him hurt, but the show still had Madison, Nick, and Alicia. They could carry it, except they couldn't, because the show wouldn't let them. Nick died in episode 3 of season 4, shot by a child. 3 episodes into a new season with new showrunners, and one of the original 4 pillars was gone. Then Madison burned herself alive in episode 8, sacrificing herself at the stadium. That's 2/3 of the remaining Clark family eliminated within 8 episodes. 3 seasons of investment in these characters, in the specific ways they loved and failed each other, incinerated in less than half a season. The show spent roughly 40 episodes building the Clark family as its emotional foundation. Then, it took 8 episodes to demolish it completely. That's not character development. That's demolition. And once the family was gone, what was left? Alicia and Strand, 2 people. Everyone else was either new or imported from The Walking Dead. The show's entire reason for existing, the thing that made it structurally different from its parent series, had been amputated. What remained was just another group of strangers surviving together, which is, literally just The Walking Dead with a different title card. The show didn't outgrow the Clarks. It killed them off and had absolutely nothing to replace them with. You can't remove the spine from a body and expect it to keep standing, but if losing the family was bad, what they did to Madison specifically was somehow even worse. The Madison Clark erasure? Here's a fun exercise in how to ruin a character twice. Madison Clark died in season 4, episode 8, No One's Gone. She lured a horde of walkers into the stadium and lit them up, sacrificing herself so her kids could escape. It was devastating. It was final. And it gutted the show in ways the writers clearly didn't anticipate. But here's the thing. She wasn't actually dead. For over 3 real-world years spanning seasons 4 through 7, Madison Clark was gone, absent, written out. The show restructured itself entirely around her absence. Characters grieved her. Alicia's entire arc became about processing the loss of her mother. Viewers moved on. The show moved on. And then, in the season 7 finale, surprise. Madison's alive. Turns out she hid inside a water truck tank during the stadium fire, which is, not ideal as a dramatic reveal when you've spent 3 seasons treating her death as the emotional bedrock of every character decision on the show. Let me explain why this is a lose-lose situation. Madison's death broke Fear the Walking Dead. She was the protagonist. She was the anchor. Removing her left a vacuum that Morgan Jones and a rotating cast of underdeveloped villains couldn't fill. Fans knew it too. The hashtag Bring Back Madison campaigns ran for years. People genuinely believed that if the show just brought her back, everything would be fixed. Turns out, no. Season 8 revealed that Madison had been working for Padre as a collector, which is a polite way of saying she'd been kidnapping children and resettling them into a militarized island community. Kim Dickens herself described the returning version as Madison 2.0, a colder, more ruthless character. So the Madison fans spent 3 years demanding back wasn't even the same person anymore. Great, add that to the list. And co-showrunner Ian Goldberg told Insider they would answer how she survived the stadium, treating the resurrection like it was the big question audiences needed resolved. But that was never the question. Nobody was losing sleep over the mechanics of a water truck. The actual question was whether bringing her back was narratively earned after 3 entire seasons built on the assumption she was dead. Nobody bothered to answer that one. Here's where it gets complicated. Her absence destroyed the show's emotional core, but her return retroactively cheapened everything that happened while she was gone. Every grief scene, every character motivation rooted in losing Madison, every decision Alicia made because her mother was dead, all of it became hollow the moment Madison walked back on screen. 3 seasons of storytelling didn't just lose their protagonist. They lost their meaning. The tragedy is that fans were right to want her back and wrong to think it would help. Too much damage had been done. The show had already rebuilt itself poorly around a Madison-shaped hole. Filling that hole 3 years later with a different version of the character didn't repair anything. It just reminded everyone of what they'd lost. But if Madison's treatment feels like a writing paradox, wait until you meet the character who turned contradicting himself into an entire personality. And the show actually admitted it. The Morgan Jones paradox. Morgan Jones is not a character, he's a mood ring with a stick. And I don't mean that as some throwaway insult. The show literally had Morgan admit he's been 16 different somebodies since it all ended. That's not character development. That's the writers accidentally publishing their most honest self-review in Walking Dead history. A line meant to sound deep and introspective that instead reads like a confession. Hey, we know we've been making this up as we go. Please don't be mad. Here's the thing. Morgan arrives in Fear Season 4, Episode 1, fresh off The Walking Dead, and he immediately becomes the center of gravity. Not Alicia, not Strand, not any of the characters you'd spent 3 seasons investing in. Morgan, a guy from a completely different show, walks in and the camera basically says, "Okay, everyone, new main character just dropped. Lenny James is a fantastic actor." Nobody's arguing that. But the writing gave him nothing consistent to work with. From Season 4 through Season 5, Morgan clings to his pacifist philosophy like it's a life raft. All life is precious. No killing. He's basically a Zen monk wandering through Texas, trying to hand out protein bars and good vibes. 2 entire seasons of preaching nonviolence to people who are actively being shot at. Then Season 6 rolls around and he beheads a bounty hunter, just casually decapitates a man and tells Virginia, "Morgan Jones is dead. You're dealing with somebody else now." Cool line, I guess, if you ignore the fact that we've watched this exact transformation happen before. On the other show, multiple times. Morgan goes peaceful, something bad happens. Morgan goes feral, someone talks him down. Morgan goes peaceful again. It's not an arc, it's a washing machine cycle. Across both shows, Morgan has ping-ponged between pacifist and savage killer roughly 5 times. Each transformation is treated like this massive emotional turning point, complete with dramatic music and long stares into the middle distance. But none of them stick, because the next season just resets him to whatever the plot needs. He's not a person with consistent psychology, he's a franchise chess piece getting moved to whichever square the writers need, filled that week. The 16 different somebodies line from Season 6, Episode 3 is comedy gold because it's supposed to be this vulnerable moment of self-reflection. But all it actually does is highlight that the writers have changed his core identity so many times that even the character can't keep track. When your protagonist has to explain away his own inconsistency in dialogue, you haven't written a complex character, you've written a problem and taped a bandage over it on camera. Fans saw through it immediately. Morgan wasn't complex. He was muddled. A character given contradictory motivations season after season, then handed a single line of dialogue to retroactively frame all that chaos as intentional depth. It wasn't depth. It was a character who got passed between writing rooms like a library book nobody bothered to read the previous chapters of. But if Morgan's identity crisis is bad, wait until you meet the villain who made Season 4's back half almost unwatchable, the filthy woman. Let's talk about Martha. Her husband Hank died in a car accident right at the start of the outbreak. Nobody stopped to help, and from that single event, Martha concluded that helping people makes them weak, and that she needed to kill anyone who offered assistance to others. That's her entire motivation. That's the whole thing. Her master plan involved finding water bottles that people had left out for strangers, carefully opening each one, poisoning it with antifreeze, and then resealing it so it looked untouched. One bottle at a time, individually, by hand. This is a villain operating at the logistical scale of someone tampering with Halloween candy. She's not a warlord. She's a woman with a grudge and a bottle of antifreeze wandering around Texas hoping someone gets thirsty at exactly the right location, which is, not ideal for a season antagonist. But here's the thing. Martha isn't the real problem. She's just the most obvious symptom. Because Fear the Walking Dead went through villains the way a toddler goes through crayons, breaking every single one before moving on to the next. The Vultures showed up in Season 4's first half looking genuinely threatening. A group that just waits outside your walls until you run out of supplies? That's actually a compelling concept. But the show defeated them almost entirely off-screen, rushing through their arc so fast you'd miss it if you blink. All that build-up gone. Then came Virginia and the Pioneers, who somehow stretched across roughly 20 episodes spanning Seasons 5 and 6 without ever developing a motivation beyond I want to control things because I like controlling things. The governor had Woodbury and a desperate need to project normalcy over his own psychosis. Negan had an entire philosophy about civilization through fear. Virginia had a cowboy hat and vague organizational skills. But if you think a generic dictator is where the escalation stops, absolutely not. Teddy Maddox and his doomsday cult launched 10 nuclear warheads in the Season 6 finale. The show went from a woman poisoning water bottles to actual nuclear annihilation in roughly 2 seasons. That's not raising stakes. That's narrative panic. It's a writer's room slamming the bigger button over and over because they never figured out how to make anything feel genuinely threatening at a human level. And then, they turned Victor Strand into a villain. Strand, a character people had watched for 7 seasons, suddenly decided he was going to be a tower-dwelling dictator in the nuclear wasteland. His transformation felt less like character development and more like the show running out of new people to make evil. We need a bad guy. What about Strand? He's been here since the pilot. Yeah, but what if he was mean now? Sold. The parent show understood something. Fear never did. The governor worked because he was a dark mirror of Rick. Negan worked because he forced the audience to question whether Rick's group were really the good guys. Every great Walking Dead villain represented an ideological challenge. Fear's villains represented whatever the writers thought would fill 16 episodes. From bottle poisoner to nuclear cult leader to your own friend just being kind of rude now, it's a show fundamentally incapable of creating opposition that means anything. But if the villains were bad, wait until you see what the show did with the nuclear wasteland they created, because the logic gets so much worse. Nuclear wasteland logic. 10 nuclear warheads detonated across Texas. 10. That's not a plot point. That's an extinction-level event layered on top of an already existing extinction-level event. And the showrunners knew exactly what they had. They went on record promising this would very much change the fabric of the show. Radioactive walkers would represent a new, unknown quantity level of threat. The entire landscape of Fear the Walking Dead was supposed to transform into something we'd never seen before in this franchise. And for about 2 episodes, it almost worked. The irradiated wasteland looked different. The walkers looked different, with their appearance varying based on how close they'd been to the blast sites and whether they were alive or dead when the bombs hit. That's actually a cool detail. That's the kind of world building that makes you lean forward. But here's where it falls apart. The show introduced nuclear radiation as a constant environmental threat and then immediately forgot how radiation works. Not took creative liberties. Forgot. Characters would walk through zones that should have killed them in minutes and come out the other side with nothing worse than a cough. Other characters would get sick from brief exposure in areas that seemed comparatively mild. The rules changed every single episode based on whatever the script needed to happen next. And then there's Alicia Clark. The show had already established that radiation exposure was fatal. Other survivors got sick and died. That was the rule. That was the consequence the show itself created. So when Alicia contracts radiation poisoning, you'd expect the show to follow its own logic. Turns out, no. Alicia survived. No meaningful explanation. No secret cure. No genetic anomaly. She just didn't die because she was Alicia Clark, and the plot needed her breathing. Which is, not ideal when your entire season is built around the premise that radiation is dangerous. The broader problem is even worse than any individual inconsistency. A nuclear apocalypse on top of a zombie apocalypse should have been the most dramatic escalation in Walking Dead history. It should have fundamentally changed how characters survive, how they travel, what they eat, where they sleep. Every single decision should have been filtered through the reality of living in an irradiated wasteland. Instead, our characters navigated the nuclear hellscape using basically the same survival strategies they'd been using for 6 seasons. Find shelter, avoid walkers, talk about feelings, repeat. The nukes became set dressing, a color filter. The sky looked a little more orange, the walkers looked a little more crispy, and absolutely nothing of substance changed about how the show operated. You could remove the nuclear element entirely from season 7, and the character arcs would play out almost identically. That's not a world-altering event. That's a screensaver. This is the moment Fear the Walking Dead stopped even pretending its world had rules. When your show can detonate 10 nuclear warheads and have it matter less than a bad thunderstorm, you've lost the audience's trust in your storytelling. Every threat from this point forward carries 0 weight because the viewer knows, with absolute certainty, that consequences are optional. The bombs went off and nothing changed. Great, add that to the list, but if you think a nuclear apocalypse with no consequences was bad, wait until you see what they did with Padre. The Padre letdown. Padre was supposed to save this show. It was teased throughout season 7 as this massive mystery, this place that could mean safety or salvation or something worth caring about. Characters whispered about it like it was the promised land, and when season 8 finally premiered on May 14th, 2023, we got our answer. Padre was an old island fortress run by people who thought stealing children and raising them as soldiers was a reasonable community model. Cool, add that to the list. And Madison Clark, the character fans had spent years campaigning to bring back, was working for it as a collector, kidnapping children from their parents and delivering them to Padre like some kind of post-apocalyptic child services agent with 0 oversight. Let that sink in for a sec. The show's original protagonist, the woman whose apparent death broke the fan base, was brought back from the dead just to serve as muscle for yet another authoritarian organization. We'd already done this. Virginia and the Pioneers, Strand's Tower, Teddy's cult. The show had exactly one villain template, and it used it until the template disintegrated into a fine powder and blew away in the wind. But here's where it gets genuinely embarrassing. June's storyline in season 8 was Madison's storyline. Both were loners working for Padre. Both turned against it to protect children. Both had supporting characters who stayed loyal to Padre because they were protecting their own families. The writers writers didn't just run out of ideas. They copy-pasted a character arc within the same season and hoped nobody would notice. You could literally swap the character names in the scripts, and the episodes would still function. I don't know what to tell you. The anthology format made everything worse. When Season 6 introduced it, the structure felt fresh. Focused episodes, tight character work, real tension. Individual hours that could stand on their own while still feeding into a larger narrative. By Season 8, it had been done to death beyond resuscitation. Main characters would vanish for weeks at a time with zero explanation. Every episode needed 5 minutes of exposition just to remind you where everyone was and what they were doing. The momentum didn't stall. It evaporated. You'd finish an episode genuinely invested in a storyline, and then the show would just abandon it for 3 weeks to follow someone you barely remembered existed. And that's the thing about this final season. It wasn't just one more bad year of television. It was the cumulative weight of every single failure we've talked about. The skip transition meant there was no foundation. The reboot killed the family. The villains never landed. The logic collapsed under nuclear warheads that nobody understood. Padre was the last chance to course correct, and instead the show recycled the same beats it had already exhausted 3 times over. At a certain point, you have to wonder if anyone in the writer's room was actually watching their own show. Fear the Walking Dead ran for 113 episodes across 8 seasons. It premiered as a show about a family watching civilization crumble around them, something genuinely different from its parent series. It ended on November 19th, 2023, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a creative whimper. The cast had been gutted. The identity had been erased. The goodwill had been burned through so thoroughly that the finale barely registered as an event. Most fans had already stopped watching. The ones who stuck around did so out of obligation, not excitement. This was a show about the fall of civilization that itself fell apart in slow motion. Not all stories have a point. Sometimes they're just sad and disappointing from beginning to end. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every zombie virus type explained, click the video on the screen now.